Good evening. It's Thursday, August 25th, and I'm going to open up our regular meeting of the board. It is 6:17. I'm going to take roll call. Director Deppie.
Here.
Director Shara-Swat.
Here.
Vice President Tasai.
Here.
All right. Are there any public comments? Seeing no public comments, we will adjourn to closed session and resume afterwards. Oh, it's April 25th. Sorry, I guess I just went ahead. It's April 25th. Thank you.
Should we turn these mics off now?
And
this is a special meeting. Yeah, you said regular.
Oh.
You're probably about December, I'll have it down. Me too. No, that's fine.
Good evening. It's 7:30 on April 25th, and we are here for the meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Service District. I'm going to take roll. Director Madavi.
Here.
Director Deppie.
Here.
Director Shara-Swat.
Here.
And Vice President Tasai.
Here.
Okay, and I'm Eileen Natoli. I'm here as well. And the guide dog of the day is Lila. We will begin. I first want to introduce Nate, who is the Reverend here at Arlington Community Church and has been so kind to let us have this space. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be very brief and just say a word of welcome on behalf of our congregation. I'm the new minister here at Arlington Community Church, just started back in March, and wanted to welcome you all to this space. We're very proud of being one of the homes for our community here in Kensington, and we are glad to host you all tonight. A few practical details that you might want to know if you didn't notice. The bathrooms are just right around the corner, right out there, and to the left. We're not blessed with a huge amount of space for the bathrooms, but the good news is they're right nearby. If you want the Wi-Fi password, I'm going to repeat it twice. We do have Wi-Fi down here. The password is LoveDub52. You can hear the backstory for that some other time. Capital L-O-V-E, capital D-O-V-E 52.
And it's all run together. No spaces.
No spaces. Capital L-O-V-E, capital D-O-V-E 52. There is a defibrillator towards the back. Where is the defibrillator? Then right there it is. Our friend Ricky is demonstrating. Hopefully that won't be necessary, but there it is. Welcome everybody. I hope this meeting is productive and fruitful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nate. All right. We had a closed session earlier, and Director Madavi joined after we began, and we have nothing to report out of closed session. I'm going to begin with public comments on items not on the agenda tonight. Are there any public comments?
Madam President, the Brown Act does allow people to make comments at any time before an agenda item comes up. You can ask them nicely to hold their comments, but we cannot stop them from it.
All right. So,
Could you repeat that, please? I didn't bring my book with me.
There's a provision in the Brown Act that allows people to just talk about any item on the agenda before it comes up. Politely ask that, we not front load everything if you can wait, but you are, I believe, authorized to speak.
Madam President, may I ask that you consult our legal counsel?
yes, I looked over it. Yeah.
The Brown Act, is this on? People hearing? The Brown Act.
Get closer.
The Brown Act provides that the board must hold a public comment session to address matters not on the agenda, and must allow the public to speak before taking issues on the agenda, before taking action on matters on the agenda. The Brown Act does not address the question of when these comments must be heard, other than, of course, saying before action is taken, as I said. it is perfectly compatible with the Brown Act and in fact standard of practice to have an agenda that sets forth the order in which various things will occur, including the public comment period.
Right, and after all, we do want an organized meeting, and we can't have people popping up at any time. All right, so now that that's settled, and hopefully it is, there were no comments on items not on the agenda. Is Genevieve here?
Oh, there was.
Genevieve.
There was.
Oh,
There is.
Sorry, we came to discuss something that's not on the agenda. So
okay, please, yeah.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. Kids come
Please use the mic.
Yes, hello. This is detached.
The podium may be a problem. You might want to move the podium.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll move this briefly. I think you'll be able to hear us. Hi, my name is Emily Ullman, and I am a resident at 754 Coventry Road. And I'm here to discuss the leash policy for dogs in the park. Because, and my son would like to say something too.
I would also like if the people who are walking would, so that they could build a dog park, because I saw a lady, she was really active with a dog off leash, and the dog was just running at me whenever he thought the soccer ball was a real ball, and then I'm afraid of dogs, so I just wanted you guys to like make a dog park.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's Bennett. He's 5 years old. And we felt like it was important to inform the community that we feel that there is a policy, there's a county policy about leash law, and it is not observed by all of our residents. We were at the park on the evening of April 12th, and during the time that we were there, which was about 1 hour, we did have a situation with somebody who was off leash and was very entitled about being off leash with her dog to play. And we understand because it's fine to play with your animals and to have space for that. But it is not okay to then sort of dismiss the law and also, to not have to not enforce it. So there's no signage that actually states what the fines would be were somebody to be cited for this. And also I feel like since we saw 9 dog walkers with 10 dogs, 8 of them off leash, and I love dogs, I think dogs are amazing, but I also want to respect that there are people who do have dog trauma, who are afraid of dogs, and children who are scared of dogs sometimes. And in particular in the park, I think that there are some solutions that could be used that would make it possible for everyone, such as limited hours for off-leash dog play or a dog park. And so I just wanted to say thank you for listening to us.
Can I ask what time?
This was 6:55 to 8:03 p.m. And in fact, we did contact the police. Sergeant on duty came, he's here this evening, and we reported it. Unfortunately, the person that was the problem had already left, but yeah, it was in the evening time. Thank you.
Madam President, can I suggest that we ask the deputy clerk to agendize this item?
Yes, Tony, can you please make sure that this is agendized at our next meeting? I fully support that. I walk guide dogs, and many times when I'm in the park, the dogs will just approach the guide dog, and that's a real problem. And I like dogs too, but I've had guide dogs attacked twice by dogs, and when these dogs come running at you, it's really scary. You just don't know. No, I will be very happy to push forward on that. Thank you. All right.
Madam President, might I just quote the part of the Brown Act I was referring to so there is no confusion?
I think we've addressed that.
I'm sorry, I was answering questions from the town manager.
Director Madawi wants to know if he can read the Brown Act.
I have not disputed his reading of the Brown Act. I really took it out.
Can't hear you back here.
And How about now? I understand that the words that you read earlier about the Brown Act are in there. However, there is nothing limiting the board's ability to have an agenda that sets forth the order of what happens.
Say what?
I was responding to Director Mugabe's question.
Saying that there's nothing that limits the order of comments within an agenda item. So in other words, if you want an orderly meeting, it's perfectly fine to ask for comments before an agenda item to be presented at that time as opposed to randomly throughout the meeting.
Well, it can't be random actually, but, you know, it's before or during.
Right. And we will do it immediately before. All right, so are there any other public comments on items not on the agenda?
Good evening. Can you hear?
No.
Hello?
Yeah, maybe we should take the mic off and just have the mic off.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Gutierrez. And the first thing I would like to ask is that the board keep time in terms of the allotted time of 3 minutes per person, so that we don't have long dialogues. My main message tonight concerns the police department and the matrix evaluation. At the last board meeting, there was a dichotomy raised that people either loved the police or hated them. There was an obvious nod. There was an obvious nod, and I was placed in the latter category.
Andy, if that's a matter for the police, we do have that as part of the matrix presentation. Should we wait on that? Yes.
Okay,
Please,
great.
thank you.
In the meantime, we'll go down and use this thing.
You could just leave it, look, rest it on the ledge because I think the holder is yeah, that's fine too. Thank you. All right. So, oh, sure. Oh.
My name is Barbara Peterson. I'm a Kensington resident and homeowner for 20 years. I'm a UC Berkeley recent retiree. My husband is a public school teacher. I've raised my 3 children here. I feel strongly that we must work together to support and maintain our Kensington Police Department.
Excuse me, that's going to be an item when we have the matrix, so.
All right.
We're taking comments not on the agenda.
Okay, is it possible for me to speak about my personal feelings about it, my experience?
You're happy to speak about your personal feelings when that item comes up on the agenda. Well, we're going to take, I'm going to take something out of order, but it's item 7B. Okay. And that's to accommodate our attorney, Genevieve Ling. And she is here to
Board comments, board comments.
we will get board comments. She is here to address draft section 3000 in the policy and procedure manual.
Thank you for having me here this evening. Let me know if you can't hear me in the back. I just wanted to give a really brief introduction of what section 3000 was and what it will now do, and I will then take questions from the board. The prior manual for policies and procedures in Kensington didn't really address key provisions in state and federal law with respect to employment policies. In addition to missing these significant pieces, most of those policies were addressed to the sworn staff and not your non-sworn staff or your other agency staff. And it was also unclear that these policies had been formally adopted by boards past. So what I did was I reviewed these policies, I adopted what I could carry over from those policies, updated them and supplemented them with current legal requirements. I used some template documents and customized them for Kensington specifically. These policies that you have in the agenda packet are found in every personnel policy for public agencies, nonprofits, and private sector employers that I've dealt with in my 10+ years of experience as an attorney. I drafted the policies, but I didn't have a hand in the format of the policy, so I can't specifically say why the policy is numbered what it's numbered, but I can talk about the substance of the policy. Just very quickly, I categorized these policies into a few buckets, as it were. First bucket are the ones that are required by law, like sexual harassment, anti-discrimination, sick leave policies. Those are required by the law for the agency to have. Another bucket would be restatements of the law. So while it is understood that we comply with these provisions, such as time off to vote, or like access to personnel records, instead of having employees go through and look through the labor code or the government code, we simply have provided that, like a brief summary of that information within the policy so employees have access to it. A third bucket is what I would call best practices. These policies are not required for an agency, but I think that having policies on telephone and device use, alcohol and drug use, work outside of the organization, for example, are good to have because they create a shared understanding of expectations for agency staff with respect to these topics. And then the last bucket I would categorize as basic fundamental employment practices. They are, hours of work, lists of the holidays that employees have, overtime, leaves. They're standard job-related policies that, again, provide consistent and clearly articulated expectation and information for employees. And with that, I'm happy to entertain questions about the draft policy.
Order of operations, have we just only jumped to 7C?
Yes, to accommodate our
So-
council. Actually, yeah, to 7C.
So we're completely going against what we put out to the public.
I made the announcement that to accommodate our attorney, we would be moving one item ahead.
Okay, may I be recognized to ask some questions, please?
Yes.
Okay, I have some specific questions on the policy. All right, how's that?
Can I say something about the mics?
Okay.
Can I say something about the mics? These are different from our usual ones. You have to speak right into them.
Okay.
Pretend that you're on stage singing.
For those of you who are new to these meetings or haven't been here for a while, this is our first time in this space, so please bear with us. On page 11, under punctuality and attendance, I just noticed that the bottom two paragraphs of the, sorry to be different, but the bottom two paragraphs of the policy are written in a sort of different way. The whole entire, as far as I read, is written in the employee, unless this should have been indented. Somehow it then says, if you know. So I don't know if this is meant.
It is directed, this policy bunch will be provided to employees, so employees will have it to refer to.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's written. All right, thank you. I'm just gonna, I marked down my pages, so just give me another second. I noticed on page 19, again, I'm sorry, I'm a grammarian, I think there may be a missing S from requires the approval of the general manager.
What,
Sorry, under telecommuting, page 19, I think telecommuting is at the discretion and requires.
Oh, requires,
Okay,
okay.
this is one thing. Oh, yeah. Again, a formatting issue, just to help you with pointing it out. On page 29, the very top sentence says the district offers a paid family leave program pursuant to state law. I don't believe that's meant to be bolded. I think that's just a formatting issue. Page 30, under 3220.4.1, the policy on drugs. I did not see anything in here about cannabis. And I am wondering two things. One, it talks about a controlled substance that is not legally obtainable under state or federal law. And there is a conflict with federal law around the California cannabis policy. So if I read this correctly, this means cannabis is not permitted.
Unless it's medical.
Unless it's medical.
Yes, and we can certainly clarify this section to break that out more, but it is still not legal under federal law, so the conflict is
Okay,
right,
okay.
and this could be made more clear.
Okay, I think it might be more clear, and should that change, is there, I would assume there's nothing that would bar an agency like ours from treating cannabis like alcohol, barring medical usage.
Right. That would be a policy decision that you would make as a board.
Okay.
You have to speak closer.
And to
But
know-
I think the best thing is take the mic off the holder and use the mic directly because it's not working very well.
Okay, thank you, those are my only questions.
Just to note, drug policy, I mean, this is only for non-sworn employees, and therefore does not, there are different rules for public safety officers around drug use.
Right, but I think that we as an agency have the right to bar cannabis, whether it's legal or not.
Right, that's a decision that the board makes.
I have some really high-level questions. May I ask?
Yes.
Okay, section 3180.7, where you say, in order to ensure compliance with district rules and regulations,
Page numbers, it would be a little more helpful.
page number 20, in order to ensure compliance with district rules and regulations, employees must be asked to cooperate in inspections of their work areas and or personal property, including but not limited to lockers, packages, purses, backpacks, and other personal property brought into the district premises. My general question is that compatible with the Fourth Amendment?
Generally speaking, if the employer has reasonable suspicion, then yes, it is generally
But
compatible.
it does not say reasonable suspicion, just says employees may be asked to cooperate.
Well, we can always ask for an employee's cooperation. An employee may refuse to cooperate, but even the police can ask for an individual's cooperation before a search.
So, just to be very clear, this is not obligatory cooperation.
No, it's asking for cooperation. It is not being directed to cooperate.
Okay, that should be made very clear, because we are a government organization, just for the record. Okay, next big question. Sections 3000.1 and 3170.11, that's on the first page. And the other one is on the 15th page. So, may I ask who district management is?
I'm going to defer that question. I assume that it would be the district's general manager and the board working together. But if there's a different person who's understood to be the district manager,
Because I'd like to point out that Government Code Section 61040, is that the legislative body, sets policies for the operation of the district. Obviously, the board shall provide for the implementation of these policies, which is the responsibility of the district's general manager. But I should point out, fiscal things, how much we assign money and stuff, goes to how many staff you have and the number of positions you have. So are you saying that the board is usurping or the general manager is taking the power that the board legally has in its purview? Further, on page 15, you say that the existing positions, may be abolished or amended by the board. In addition, new positions and position descriptions may only be added or amended by the board. So we cannot essentially delete the positions after the general manager is creating them. Is that my interpretation?
I actually don't. I assume that's your interpretation if that's what you're telling me, but the board is adopting these policies, and when within the board's authority, delegating to the general manager the ability to implement.
But you're saying we're giving up our government code granted rights as a board.
No, it doesn't say that. It says,
It's implicit.
no, in addition, new positions and position descriptions may only be added or amended by the board. I would say
The
amended.
second part may only be added or amended, so we can't delete. So the general manager could make 20 new positions and we have no power to delete them, and that changes the budget.
An amendment could be deletion, and we also have power over the budget.
15.
Second paragraph from the bottom, Lily.
And also on page 1 it says it's the sole discretion of the district management, which is almost saying that it's not the board of directors if district management is meant to be the general manager.
You're on page 1?
Yeah.
And what paragraph?
Paragraph 3. I'd like to ask, when these policies were they made with the thought that we are a democratically elected board and that we are not subsuming our powers to the general manager out of practicality?
Sure, of course.
And so let me ask you, given that there's only 48 hours of total sick leave, maybe 7 days total, this is completely at will, the district reserves the right to fire at any time, will not give any sort of recommendation for a job well done, who do you expect is going to actually want to take this job?
Recommendations in employment nowadays are actually, most employers will not provide a recommendation. Most employers will merely verify dates of employment. There are liability questions surrounding recommending or denigrating employees. So we want to avoid that at all costs.
Both Microsoft and Apple, where I work,
They're private companies, that be different. We're a public
both
organization.
Microsoft and Apple, where I work, and they tend to get a lot of people wanting to work there, have those same conditions.
They pay better than us too.
The policies as are.
Maybe not.
I will just say that I support the characterization of these policies as very standard in my experience, in government and private sector and nonprofit.
So it's ethical to treat people like a sweatshop labor.
What is ethical is to set professional standards, to give folks notice of those standards, to have them adopted at an open meeting of the board, and to debate those in a public forum. And that's what we're doing.
Okay, then one other question, because I don't want to belabor this point that there's so many things wrong here, but the last one is in section 3120.4.3. I wrote this down by sections, because I'm used to reading government code like that, you know. You have to amuse my...
3120.3?
Yeah.
That, I think, is on page 4.
Page 5. Okay, but anyway, so it says the general manager may designate any regular employee as a confidential employee. And that employee can access personnel files, has access to attorney-client privilege documents with the prior authorization and approval of the general manager. First question is, whose personnel files? Because I remind you, we do control the police department too, and those personnel files are personnel files, but are held to a different legal standard.
If you go to page 1, you will see policy 3000.1, and the first paragraph says these personnel policies, rules, regulations, hereinafter referred to as rules, are applicable to the non-sworn employees of the district and the chief of police.
Well, that's still vague.
Well, I think it, right.
And then my other question is, Anne, if anyone gets to see anything legally confident, attorney-client privilege, is that void privilege?
Not if they're within the attorney-client group.
But like any random personnel?
This would not be a random person. It would be the general manager or someone specifically designated to see specific privileged documents.
And so is there any standards for how he picks those people, or can he just pick at will?
I believe that the board is supposed to trust the sound judgment of the general manager that they hire.
That's a wonderful internal control. That's all I would say.
There are no other board comments on policy 3000. Let me open it up to the public if they have any comments on policy 3000.
First of all, thank you. I'll talk into this, although you guys know I generally don't need to have a microphone to be heard at the back of the room. Thank you to the church for letting us be here. This is a nice big room, and we appreciate your accommodating us. I have a lot of criticisms of this document, mostly based on the fact that they didn't have Mrs. Dwyer in 8th grade for English. And I mean that. There are pronouns all over the place which don't have any antecedents. There are unclear concepts like non-sworn employees of the district and the chief of police. Does that include the general manager? He's a non-sworn employee. The chief of police, at the moment, my understanding, is probably a member of the union, and therefore there's a labor contract involved. And is this draft consonant? Does it work well with that document? There are a number of other things, and this is a lot of material to digest in this time period. I've only had a day with it, and I've done a pretty good job marking it up. I'm wondering if this could possibly be put for consideration by a subcommittee of some kind to go over it and to receive commentary from the public. Because to go line for line and say, okay, in its sole discretion, district management, and my question would be, does this mean the GM as well, may determine if it is in the best interest of the district. What is in the best interest? It reserves and retains the rights and responsibilities. There are numerous references in here to a commercial enterprise. There are references to customers. We don't have customers. There are references to clients. There's one sentence in here that refers to controlling the activity of a third party with whom an employee comes into contact. I just have a lot of questions. I don't feel, as I said, that it's a well-written document. No offense to anyone.
Actually, a quick question. Was this the third part of the $30,000 work product Bob Dice was working on?
May I ask first that our attorney address some of the question about the chief of police, please, to the...
May I have an answer first before we move on?
I just want to be able to answer at least the one question I know Linda raised about the chief of police and his membership in the union.
The chief of police is under an agreement as the chief of police, and I believe he has return rights as the chief to his position as, I don't remember what rank he held prior to that. Master Sergeant, thank you. So while he is chief of police, he would be subject to some of these personnel policies. He also, again, has his own employment agreement with the district, so those would apply as well. And any return rights, he would be subject to the rules, the standard operating procedures of the police department and the MOU that governs.
Thank you. Do you care to address any other comments that were made?
Certainly happy to clarify or fix errors in the document as asked for by the board.
Does the board request further clarification? Does the board, would the board like further clarification?
Yes.
I would say this, that in my 30-plus years in public agency service, there has been a growing trend to use commercial terms like client and customer to refer to the services that a public agency provides to its residents. So that is not necessarily an error, it's probably quite intentional.
May I have now an answer to my question? I was asking, is this part of the $30,000 work product Bob Dice is working on?
This section?
Or all of it? All of this, man. This section included?
Yes, it is.
So that is a yes. This is part of Bob Dice's work.
Well, he was in charge of it. And, Genevieve is an experienced employment attorney who wrote most of the sections, I believe, and all of them. So that's what we're depending on. Bob Dice is not an employment attorney, so Genevieve, who works for him, prepared this document.
Hey, staff. And I would like to thank the church for providing this great space. Actually, just one question. It has to do with the decision to make certain employees at-will employees as opposed to providing them with civil service protections, which you normally would provide public sector employees. I'm not talking about the general manager, nor am I talking about the chief of police, but for other employees. I would normally suspect for a public agency to provide civil service protection. for those employees as opposed to making them at-will employees? And was that a decision of the board, the general manager, or was that just written in on your part?
As I said, I reviewed the policies previously and I carried over what were in those policies that were still up to date. Again, if the board would like to make a different decision on that, I'm happy to revise, but that's not a decision that I make at my level.
So what you're saying is it was no change to the status of that role?
Correct.
So the previous policies and procedures, and I apologize for not doing that. All the employees were at will. I would recommend actually that they not be at will and be provided with the proper civil service protections that most, if not all, public agencies provide their employees. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other public comments on section 3000?
I just wanted to thank Genevieve for preparing this document. We do not have good current policies. They're not up to date with current laws and create liability to the district. So this is a long way toward completing that task. I just wanted to thank her for the service and for also coming to the meeting tonight.
Thank you. I want to go quickly to 7A, collection of park assessment, landscaping, and lighting act of 1972. I think it should be pretty non-controversial.
I was going to ask, I'm not sure we covered item 6.
Oh, board and staff comments? Okay. Yeah, you can take that. Staff, do you have any comments?
Only that we have two, sorry, can you hear me now? Still can't now? We have a finance committee meeting scheduled on May 2nd, and also one, if I can remember correctly, I think it was May 23rd, later in the month, to talk about the budget. It's tentatively scheduled, but the one on May 2nd is to discuss the audit.
Right.
And there is not going to be a board meeting for the first part of May, so the next board meeting will be on May 23rd.
I believe the second finance committee is May 21st.
May 21st, so the board meeting will be on May 23rd.
And the finance committee will be meeting in the conference room, which is on the second floor, because it will be meeting at 3 o'clock, and this room is not available to us. So it'll be a little cramped in the conference room upstairs. Yes.
This will be quick. Don't worry, this is a piece of government code everyone will like. There's some copies at the back too. Pass it down and there. So this is an interesting piece of government code I came across. This is section 53060.7, and it actually very much pertains to this town. In fact, it's a very exclusive piece of government code that pertains to only really 5 places in the state. The section A reads, the legislature hereby finds and declares the following. You know, that police protection is an essential service for the protection of life and property and necessary to ensure the orderly conduct of society. Cities and counties have been the traditional law enforcement providers in the state. Some special districts have been granted statutory authorization to perform police protection activities. These activities include the Bear Valley Community Services District, the Broadmoor Police Protection District, the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District, the Lake Shasta Community Services District, and the Stallion Springs Community Services District. These districts are authorized to perform the same police protection duties and functions as cities and counties. So, just a bit of fun fact. You are one of 5 special districts, so you're a special district with the authority to have your own police force.
Thank you. Hearing none, let's, oh, sorry.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. Today we had a hit and run vehicle collision. No, hit and run vehicle collision. That's the officers did a preliminary investigation and found the responsible party. So kudos to those officers that were working today. And last but not least, just a brief word on recruiting. We actively have one person in background. Hopefully that background will be complete in a matter of weeks. So things are moving forward. Thank you.
So let's move on to item 7, new business 7A, the collection of... Pardon? The collection of park assessment, landscaping, and lighting act. Tony, can you introduce that, please?
Yes, Madam President. This is the annual process for the collecting the park assessment, and it's under the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972. There are 3 resolutions for you to adopt this evening. Resolution 2/1902 initiates the process for levying and collecting the assessment. Resolution 2/1903 approves the annual report, which is a document that I think is included in most of the agenda packets. It is available online. And the third step is Resolution 2/1904, which is indicates the board's intent to levy and collect the assessments. And I wanted to note a couple of changes to that last resolution. The address is the community center at 59 Arlington, so we need to change that to 52 Arlington. And we have a new resolution with that.
So that's item 5, notice of public hearing, and that's 59 Arlington.
Correct.
52, thank you.
Correct, thank you. And we may be able to do the public hearing at the next meeting on May 23rd. So we want to include, or insert in the resolution in the same section, that it will be held either on Thursday, May 23rd, or Thursday, June 13th. So it gives us the option of doing it a little sooner. For just bookkeeping purposes, it's a little easier to do it earlier before the close of the fiscal year.
All right. Are there any board comments on these 3 resolutions? Are there any public comments on these 3 resolutions? If not, I'm going to move that we adopt Resolution 2019-02, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Service District initiating proceedings for the levy and collection of assessments for the Kensington Park Assessment District for fiscal year 2019-20.
I will second that motion.
Okay. Director Madavi?
Aye.
Director Duffy?
Aye.
Director Sherrill-Swat?
Yes.
Vice President Desai?
Aye.
And I will also vote, so it passes 5-0. I'm going to move that we adopt Resolution 2019-03, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District approving the annual report for the Kensington Park Assessment District for fiscal year 2019/20.
I'll second.
Okay. Director Madavi?
Aye.
Director Duffy?
Yes.
Director Sherrill-Swat?
Yes.
Vice President Desai?
Aye.
I will also vote in favor, and that's 5-0. I'm going to move that we adopt Resolution 2019-04, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Service District declaring its intention to levy and collect assessments for the Kensington Park Assessment District for fiscal year 2019-20.
I'll second that motion.
Director Madavi? Aye. Director Duffy?
Yes.
Director Cheryl Swat?
Yes.
Director, Vice President Desai? Aye. I will also vote yes, so that's 5-0. The motion carries all three. All right. Now we will go on to item 7B, which is probably why most people are here. The evaluation of alternates relating to delivering police services, review of the process and community engagement conducted by Matrix. General Manager, could you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. This item goes through a brief history, and then it reviews the three options that are available to the board, and I'll review them for the public also. And on the history, I just wanted to note that the study of police services started with a study in December of 2009 by Brown Taylor, who was a district special employee at that time. And then the next study was done by the ad hoc committee of citizens from Kensington, who presented their report on October 1, 2016. And I believe there are some members of that committee present here tonight, including, I think I saw the chair, former chair here too. So it's good to see that we're continuing to be involved with that committee. That committee did recommend that the committee took the process forward as far as it could and recommended hiring professionals who had experience with evaluating police services. And these professionals would then evaluate the options. So with that in mind, the next landmark date would be September 14, 2017, when the board did authorize a request for proposals. And it was estimated that that study would cost around between $50,000 to $100,000. That study was awarded to Matrix Consulting Group, and it was awarded on November 29, 2017. The total cost that was awarded Matrix was $74,000. Now Matrix so far has been paid $50,759, but they are entitled to $62,000. They had actually billed the district for $62,000. It went through a review process. It wasn't initially approved because we were checking the budget, but they are entitled to that last payment, so that will bring, when that payment is made, a total of $62,000 paid to Matrix, which completes these two phases of their study. The remaining $12,000 that they proposed would be for an RFP process, which I'll discuss a little bit later with the alternatives. Matrix, Mr. Brady, who's the president of the Matrix Consulting Group and is also here this evening, has made three presentations at board meetings. They were on November 29th, 2017, May 24th, 2018, and October 4th, 2018. And in addition, Matrix also supervised 4 community meetings that were held on March 17, 2018, April 28, 2018, February 28, 2019, and March 2nd, 2019. Since some people do not like speaking in public and wanted to express their opinions privately, a community survey was prepared just for an opportunity to provide feedback, and that was also provided, handled by Matrix. There were 628 responses. Mr. Brady can summarize some of the general responses if there's any questions on the results of that. So tonight, before the board are 3 options based on these studies and analysis. The first option is an in-house police department. This is we keep the current department, and I'm proposing a couple of changes that before we go into the alternative one. The first one is that we hire an interim police chief who is an experienced police chief effective July 1, 2019, who would assist in guiding the implementation process. Now, I have, there are two things that work against us in hiring somebody for this position. The first one is the salary is low, it's below market, so it's very difficult to find someone who is retired and willing to take a chief of police position because of that. And secondly, some of the history, long-term history in Kensington, that limits some of the interest for the position of police chief. But I have been able to contact a few individuals that are under consideration, and we hope to complete this in time for by July 1, 2019. Again, this is an interim chief, not a permanent chief, who would just assist us with this whole process, but would be someone who's been a chief of police in other agencies. And secondly, the current interim chief would be appointed to the position of police captain and work for the new interim chief of police. So under all the options, it is my intent to follow through on those two items. The first alternative that I mentioned was the in-house police operation. The matrix is very specific in their recommendations. They are recommending 11 positions, including a corporal. They're recommending elimination of the detective position. They recommend filling the vacant reserve position, and they also have some other options and recommendations for the in-house operation. Now, to implement an in-house operation, the steps involved, and I've prepared these, so if the board wishes to select this alternative, you know what specifically would be required. The first is to recruit and hire a permanent chief of police. So this would be a full-time, regular employee who would serve in that position. The police chief, once selected, would work with the general manager to develop a Kensington policing strategic plan and a financial plan to address the budget issues and discuss the options available to the board of directors. And basically what this is to start off with a plan of what's going to happen to the department, both staffing and internally. And it would involve public input, probably extensive public input. Once the plan is in place, then we would also develop a performance management program and include measures of performance and also improve the training opportunities for all staff. So that would be the third part of implementing an in-house department. The matrix report also includes best practices, and they indicate how they fit in with Kensington. So part of this recommendation would be to evaluate these best practices and report back to the board on implementing those that would be applicable to Kensington. And if those are not applicable, why they are not applicable. Then number 5, there's been some questions about, in the city of Albany, about dispatch queue time and response time. And the matrix actually recommends that we review this and talk to Albany about reducing the response time and the time in the queue. So that is also one of the recommendations with an in-house department, is to study that issue and develop a plan to reduce that time over the next year. Number 6 is to evaluate cost-saving strategies. Now, a lot of this will be internal, will be related to contract negotiations and subject to the meet and confer process. But some internal services might be considered for contracting. And I'll get into that in the second option. Number 7 is to direct staff to present a balanced budget. The matrix study does indicate that it's $720,000 per year additional to implement this option. But that was only for discussion. It's not a real number. It just is based on certain assumptions that may not be accurate. But it is a good talking number. Starting with that number, what staff need to do is present a balanced budget and how that can be achieved. So what options there are for increasing revenue and to appropriately fund the police department. And then number 8 is develop and implement a time frame and budget to complete all these tasks and report back to the board of directors. Because of the nature of these tasks, the public input, and some complexity in dealing with other agencies, it will probably take a year or longer possibly to complete all these items. So this would be the implementation process for an in-house department. There has been some residents have questioned the need for one of the problems we have is we don't have 24-hour supervision for all the employees. To achieve that, the matrix study recommends a sergeant to be present at all times, and that's why the staff number is at 11. So this is just good basic practice and officer safety issues related to managing a police department, and that is their recommendation. I should note that we really asked them to come up with what they felt should be done in the police department here. There were no, we really are depending on their viewpoint and their recommendation based on experience. We didn't try to influence that in any way. This is purely their recommendations. And they have been, of course, they have extensive experience in doing these reports. They essentially have done hundreds of these reports. If you read their website, I wanted to note that Kensington is a very safe community, and crime rates are trending downward, even with our difficulties in with recruitment and filling positions. Although the chief keeps reporting back very positively on hiring and recruitment, so maybe that trend is starting to change. But we still, the matrix report still recommends 11, even with the safe community that Kensington is. There were also suggestions about comparing Kensington to Ross, which is a community that has a low crime rate, but is a completely different, in a different area. It's not in an urban area, it's more a rural area. And so it's very difficult to pick one community and use that as a comparison for Kensington only. So let's see. So the next alternative, that completes the discussion on the in-house model. I'm just summarizing it in general. The next alternative is something that's been given the name hybrid, so I'll refer to it as a hybrid model. I don't know if that's a good name because it's kind of in between, I think, is how we ended up with that moniker. So in this alternative, this is related as a cousin of keeping the department. So in this alternative, the department would be kept, and a few services, as selected by the board, would be contracted out. And there's a list of potential services that could be contracted out. They may not all work in Kensington, or some of them may work in where we haven't evaluated them. I'll tell you what they are on the list. It's patrol services on the night shift. That's the lowest volume of work in Kensington is during the night shift. So that's a possibility to contract those services. Investigative services for major crimes. It's not unusual to have detectives that are experienced in other agencies, and we could contract, that would be an option to contract with them to handle any major crimes that would occur in town. Property and evidence services, so the property room and evidence could be stored at another location and managed by another public safety department. Records management. Records management is an increasingly important service in police departments. have complete records and good records and historical records is really mandatory. So those records could also be managed by someone who's a professional in managing records in another agency. That's a potential item that could be contracted. Executive management, that's the option of having a police chief who contract for police chief services with another agency. And the issue with that partly is on the list because of the difficulty in recruiting chiefs of police, as I mentioned earlier, and a permanent chief will be difficult to recruit in Kensington. Not impossible, but difficult because it's not on the career track of most police chiefs. Most young police chiefs or police chiefs go through a career track that they start in a smaller agency and then go to a larger one and become a chief over a more diverse organization with businesses. And so but they don't jump to that type of position right away. They start slowly. So we would be kind of on a career track and probably not have, if you have someone that's really dynamic chief, they probably would lose them to a larger agency. So one option would be to contract that, and you'd never have to, there have to be some parameters, obviously, on how that's managed. And then you would have to deal with the recruitment issues for a police chief. And then for skills training and support services, that could be also contracted out. And recruitment services, larger agencies do have assigned personnel doing only recruitment. I believe, and you might have seen this, I think I read that the city of San Jose sent a recruitment team to New York City. Did any of you see that story? And recruited officers in New York City for San Jose to show you how difficult it is to recruit people, to try to convince them to come to California and move away from the East Coast. So it's a very competitive business, and it shows you how far agencies will go and how much they will do to try to recruit officers. And of course, we can't do anything like that. So you could contract that out to someone who does extra things, goes to job fairs, does extra recruitment efforts. So those kind of a list of possibilities. And if you look at it like a menu, it's like a menu. You can say, well, which ones you want and which ones you don't want. So it's that type of way of thinking about these hybrid services. And to be implemented, this would require an RFP process that Matrix would present for the remaining $12,000. As I mentioned earlier, there's a remaining $12,000 in their contract. They're at $62,000, and the remaining $12,000 would bring them to their total contract of $74,000. So they would prepare an RFP. They would present it to the board of directors. The board would comment, the public would comment, have a comment period also on the request for proposal. And it's a critical document because it's what you're requesting is really important and significant. And the kinds of services and the level of the services that are identified, so you get responses for exactly what you're asking for. If the RFP is approved, then it would be distributed to El Cerrito, Albany, and Berkeley. And I've added Contra Costa County. Even though I don't think Matrix is recommending the county, only because the county is an experienced contracting agency. So it's a point of comparison. It's not recommending you go to the county, but you get a proposal so you have a point of comparison from somebody who has experience and successful practice in contracting police services. The results would be presented at a future meeting, and then they would be contracted, if selected, with the internal department. So this is kind of like 1A. It's not an alternative to, but it really is a part of the internal department. The RFP is estimated, it's a lengthy time frame. Matrix is estimated 120 to 150 days. Partly the reason that it's so long, if you think about this, is that the agencies don't work on Kensington's priorities, they work on their priorities. And when they get an RFP, they aren't going to jump, they're going to add it to their workload, check the deadlines, and get to it as part of their normal process. So we're not, and it's going to take an internal review process. The city attorney will have to review it. The finance department will have to check the numbers and figures and agree with them. The city council will have to authorize it too. You cannot send a response to an RFP if the city council does not approve it. So when you add all these factors, the internal review process of each agency that would want a response could be quite lengthy, and we don't control their time. And we can beg them to do it faster. It usually doesn't work. They do it when they feel that they want to do it in their own time frame. I wanted to note that doing an RFP does not obligate the board to accepting the RFP. It only provides information. So you can still do an RFP and still reject any of the proposals that come forward for any reason you want, whether it's cost or non-cost or level of service, whatever reason you want. So it's more of an informational process at this point. It's not a contractual process. Okay. The services that, in particular, that Matrix called out in their study that I wanted to note, there were 3 of them. The first one was, we mentioned this a little earlier, the patrol services on the night shift. So, because the Matrix study recommends 2 officers in the night shift, and it's a very low workload, it's an expensive service, so they would recommend at least considering options related to patrol services at night. And this would keep the current department as is for day services, with a high profile and a high interaction with the public, and really the heavier workload time periods. And they also recommend looking at investigative services for major crimes. Now, some of these agencies do have in-house dedicated detectives who are trained just to do this kind of work. So there would be some benefit to Kensington to hire people who are experienced in this facet and possibly save some money, since the major crimes is not an ongoing thing. But when needed, it really is needed, and it's needed quickly. And an example is to show what a police department responding very quickly to the advantages of it is the example that the police chief gave a little bit earlier, where there was a hit-and-run accident, and because of the good work of the department and the timely response, they were able to unwind and solve this case very quickly and instantly. And then, of course, crime scene investigation services. This is what is known as CSI, which is a specialty area, and it's really sometimes goes hand in hand with the investigative services, but requires specialty services. I think we may even do that now in those limited cases where they're needed. So that is the option 2, or we could even call it option 1A if we wanted to. The third option is request for a proposal to fully contract police services. This is a option that's been discussed in the past. It was reviewed by the ad hoc committee, and there's been discussion in the community, and I know there's strong feelings probably on each side of this issue. To do an RFP for this doesn't cost any more. The $12,000 that Matrix has proposed for the RFP, whether you do an RFP for just a hybrid model or the fully contract model, is the same $12,000. So there's no additional cost to do an RFP for a full contract model. As I mentioned, the Sheriff's Department has been very successful, has had success in the county, such as Lafayette would be the one that comes to mind. And so that's why we're recommending that they be included in the RFP. And the pros and cons that are listed in the staff report really are taken from the ad hoc committee. And I think they cover the topic very well. There are pros and there are cons. I can review them very quickly for you. The pros are that you do get a fully staffed department, that the contracting agency is responsible for legal liabilities. That's where the cost sometimes goes up for contracting, because they assume all legal responsibility. You have access to a broader range of police services. If there's an officer that you're not happy with, they will change it out. They will reassign the officer to another location and bring in another officer. They have improved, there's no field supervision issues because they will provide field supervision as part of the contract. And there is no, we had this discussion earlier about human resource management and the policy manual and who it applies to. Human resource management, and those of you who are professionals in the field, and I know there are some in the audience who are, is a complicated field, and it's ever-changing with new court cases. So we wouldn't have to, Kensington wouldn't have to worry about that. The contracting agency would be responsible. Now the cons to contracting out is that the contracting agency does not have control over negotiating salaries and benefits. It would really be up to the contracting agency, and they would just tell you what the results are. There's no direct control over managing day-to-day operations. So the contracting, once you have a contract and you set what the services are, then the control is from the contracting agency to provide those services. Concerns over loss of identity. This is more of a historical one where you have a police department for many years, and now you have a contracting agency providing those services. The need for effective contract management, I think, is really important. Where these models have failed, and Mr. Brady can probably talk more about it than I can, but there's a tendency to contract and then you ignore it. And that's when there's problems and issues arise, and there's poor communication. And so it does require continuous oversight and continuous contract management to assure that the contract is done and all the terms are followed and done in accordance with the written contract. If there's a contract and it does not work, and it's very difficult to reestablish a department. So the department, if you wanted to reestablish a contract and you wanted to reestablish the department, you have to really start from scratch, and once it's dissolved. And I think there was a city in the county, I think possibly Moraga, that did that. I'm not sure about that. Some of you may know. But there have been cases where that's been attempted, and it is a difficult process. And then finally, the existing officers may not be guaranteed jobs, so the contracting agency would determine who they would want to keep and how it would be run. They would not want it dictated to them. So that might lead to some officers not continuing. That is something that would have to be worked out, obviously. It wouldn't be automatic. I wanted to note that the Phase 2 report for this study that was completed by Matrix studied this unfunded actuarial accrued liability for retirement costs that are significant. They did talk about, they reviewed four options, and they recommended this active amortization option over a 15-year or 30-year period. It's a 30-year amortization that can be done over 15 years or 30 years. This is kind of an interesting point. It's not really known unless you contract. If Kensington picks up these costs, they could have reduce the costs of retirement for a contracting agency and reduce some of the PERS costs. The contracting agency would have to really study that themselves. So if that happens, it could reduce the cost of the contract. But it's really the potential contracting agency's got to review that. That's another one of the items that could extend the review process, could make it longer. So this would take time, and you need some actuarial analysis to complete that.
Can I ask you a question on the amortization? So what you're saying is our unfunded liabilities are a total of the unfunded liability for our current officers and our retired officers, so that if we were to contract and pay down this unfunded liability on the 30 or 15-year plan, that because we'd be paying down the unfunded liability for our current officers, that would be the cost savings potentially to
Potentially. I'm raising this as a possibility. It's something that we need to study. It's,
right.
I don't have information exactly, but it's got to be part of the thought process.
For those people that just love crunching these kinds of numbers.
So in this option, so this is the contracting option. So the other thing about the RFP process for contracting out, the matrix did contact all these agencies, and agencies are always in a state of transition of some kind. They're hiring new people, or people are leaving, they have a new city council that has a different perspective or different idea of how the community should be run. And so in this snapshot that Matrix did by making these contacts, only one city indicated an interest, and that was El Cerrito in contracting. And it's, even if they indicated an interest, it's possible they may lose the interest too. It's a changing environment, and also possible that someone who wasn't interested may now be interested. So it depends on when the RFP is done, what the response will be. Today, our best guess is that there would be only two responses, and that would be El Cerrito and the county. But it's not, they decide if they're interested. Based on the information we have, it appears that those would be the two that would respond to this. The Homeowners Association here in Kensington had an interesting idea in a letter they sent, where they proposed the concept of maybe trying to find out the possibility of contacting these agencies and updating this information to see if they really are interested in contracting before we send out an RFP to them. And that is an option that the board can have before making a decision. We can contact these agencies and just verify that they are they interested or not. The problem with that is that, again, it's changing. Sometimes, I'm sure in your business experience, you know, you ask someone, are you interested? They say yes, and then later they don't follow through. Or they say, no, we're not, and then suddenly they're interested. It's not, that doesn't guarantee, even if they say yes, that they will respond. So, but that is an option that the board can have if the board wishes to gain more information before taking action on this. And the recommendations that I have is to authorize this RF request for proposal, since it does not cost any more to do a hybrid or a contract or a full contract, to go ahead with both these options for $12,000. It is part of their proposal. It was approved for $74,000. No further approvals of funds are necessary, but it would have to be approved by the board before there's any authorization to do that. So I'm recommending that the board consider going ahead with that for both these those two options. Again, it's informational. It does not obligate the board to pick one of them or any of them. So we would direct Matrix to present a draft RFP to the board. Once it's approved, go ahead and distribute it to the four agencies that we had mentioned earlier. Then present the RFP results at a board meeting. And then at that point, the board would make a decision to provide direction to staff on these three options, which ones should be considered. Now, Mr. Brady is here. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, or I can certainly answer questions mostly, but if I missed something that you'd like to cover or wanted to emphasize, please feel free to.
I think you've done a great job.
sorry to be so wordy. So with that, I'll turn it back to the board president.
I think I'd like to have public comments before we have board comments. I know there's going to be a lot of people interested in this, so if you could keep your comments short, I would very much appreciate it. So if you want to speak now, please.
I'll keep my comments abbreviated. This is deeply personal for me. My family has received excellent service over the years. Sorry.
You know, it's probably best to take it off the holder and just, yeah.
My family has received excellent service over the years by KPD. I feel a debt of gratitude to our officers. Please don't dismantle. Let's work on management training and do necessary hiring to build and improve our force.
Thank you very much.
Ma'am, could you identify yourself? Could you?
They don't need to. Remember, you can't force it.
I can't force it, but if you choose to, it'd be nice to know who you are.
Oh, I introduced myself earlier.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
So my name is Barbara Hendrickson, and I looked around and realized I've lived here 21 years. Surprised me. So I wanted to say two things. One is whatever we do, our taxes should not go up, because that wouldn't be fun. And professionally, I've been a realtor for either 39 or 40 years, somewhere between. And I'm sure you are aware that if we lose our wonderful police department, people won't be as happy to come and pay a lot of money to live here. So if you plan to sell your houses, and if you, like me, are over 50, you may at some time want to move somewhere else. Or if you want to leave your houses to your kids and stay forever, you won't get as much money if we are, this is professional advice, not asked for. If we have our police, sent to somebody else, and we have a very friendly police department. I've spoken before. I've told you all the times they've saved my butt and helped me out. And I don't think people coming and going from a different community would do that. And also, is it possible this would lead to annexation to El Cerrito at some point?
My understanding when talking to the former fire chief is El Cerrito doesn't want us. Well, that would be part because the county has not maintained our roads, and it would cost the county quite a bit of money.
Because that would be a disaster. Okay, so just my few things are for this RFP, definitely one that would not increase our taxes. And,
Thank you.
And I'm saying it because I have to go home. I'm over 50.
I have been a real estate agent for about 25 years and have sold many properties in Kensington. And I have never once had somebody who came to me and asked to buy a house in Kensington because we had an independent police force. I do not think that people care much who are considering moving here, whether we have an independent police force or not. What does interest people is the elementary school and the views, and that by and large, we are a nice group of people.
Paul Doyle, if I understand, Tony, the first part of the presentation indicates that you aim to have a fully qualified interim chief on board by July 1st. I'm wondering, wouldn't it then make sense to see what that fully qualified interim chief has to say about these three options, as opposed to let's go right now and put out an RFP? We could just as well spend the $12,000 on recruitment or training, and with the benefit of experience, find out whether or not we do need to go to hybrid full service or just stay in-house. That's one point. The second point I would make is, to the extent that an RFP does go out, whether it's sooner or later, I would hope that it's a kind of a full disclosure proposition, and any potential contractor would be made aware that we do have an ordinance that says a full service contract and possibly even some hybrid models would need voter approval. So that's another thing to take into consideration.
I bought my house because of the police safety and not because of the energy situation. We bought a house because we came from Oakland and we know what Oakland is like. The police, we look into Kensington because of the public safety.
Good evening. Most of you know that I have been tabling our own police department for a very long time. And I just got up to say that I have not changed my mind. Thank you.
And it is no secret, I, Linda Lipscomb, have been in favor of maintaining our independent police department, which I love. I appreciate our officers, and I believe it has been soundly shown that that is the opinion of the vast majority of our citizens. And that is the important part, that is the result of the ex-people you can sit over here and get your chance to talk to. I'm here to urge the board to go with the option 1 recommendation of the general manager and Matrix, and that's let's staff up. We know that a full service, that Matrix has gone through its analysis, and a full service contract would cost us about $850,000 more on the sample contract they propose. Let's get our own department up to the standards that Matrix is proposing. It's written out what they apparently, these professionals think that we need in order to improve and have best practices. I don't see wasting more time and creating more instability. This has been going on for 10 years. 10 years ago, there were individuals who were interested in moving over to El Cerrito. That's how this started. And it has continued ever since. And so what will we do? We'll have an RFP out to a single taker? Or perhaps we're going to include the county. It was not 4 or 5 years ago that at the county level, for the county sheriff, David Livingston, who was head of that department, was saying, and you can look this up on Google in the press, that his department is falling apart. Look it up. You've got one potential taker. And by even Matrix's evaluation, they are not all that hot to bid on it. Instead, don't be the board that continues this instability and makes it impossible for us, attenuates this endlessly, for us to hire and perform the best practices that Matrix has provided a guideline for us to implement. What's the holdup? Thank you.
Hi, Gail Pelton. I'm here today to speak to you on behalf of the Kensington Property Owners Association, that's also known as KPOA, another KPOA. And in regards to the analysis that was prepared by Matrix Consulting Group. So KPOA has sent you a letter, which I believe now you've received, and thank you for acknowledging that you've read it to the general manager. We had not seen the general manager's recommendation before we wrote the letter, so some things were not addressed in that, but I can fill that in tonight. So just in general, our response was primarily to the deficiencies that Matrix identified in service delivery and best practice standards in the Kensington Police Department. And as they noted in their report, a lot of these problems are associated with the fact that we have a small department, and they identify that a lot of micro agencies throughout the country have staffing and operational difficulties that are experienced by, or not experienced in the same way by the larger counterparts. And so we know that this is always going to be a problem that's with us, no matter what we do, unless we go to a larger agency to provide the services to us. So, and I think what Matrix said is really we're going to have to either accept that and or attempt to resolve it with some other solutions. And I don't really know what those are, because I think, as Linda said, we've been going through this for 10 years with 3 or 4 different police chiefs, and we still have a lot of the same issues. We are supported the phase 1 recommendations as far as the training, the strategic plan, community planning, developing performance objectives and metrics, and contracting for technical and professional administrative services. But we believe that these changes also need to be made in conjunction with some of the recommendations that are more talked about in the phase 2 report now. I think are this option or alternative 2 that the general manager has outlined. I think before you make any of the recommended changes to the staffing, to the positions and the salary, you need to consider that in the context of whether you're going to contract for either a hybrid model or a full contract, obviously. I think the issues of lower salaries in Kensington, in the police department, that's not a new issue for us. In the past, this district has always benchmarked to other communities from smaller jurisdictions in the Bay Area, which is how they've arrived at some of the salary analysis that's been used towards your negotiations. And we felt a little bit that Matrix maybe fell short in helping you understand some other alternatives for addressing the salary issue here in comparison to some of these other jurisdictions, but maybe that wasn't part of their contracts. So, but one of the things that we see is going down the road is that this district's going to need to have a 2-tier system. So you have your older employees who are under one system and the newer ones coming in with maybe higher salaries but lower benefits. And that's done throughout the state. I can speed this up. We recommend that that the district only consider some incremental changes right now, particularly because you only work within your existing revenue sources. And Kensington property owners already pay an additional tax right now of about $541 annually for police services. So, anytime you're going to make significant changes in the cost of the police department's budget, that could have an impact on the need to go back to the taxpayers. And we don't recommend at this time an additional tax for operations. We also request, and I think this was in the general manager's report, that you would do some type of financial plan for the implementation of the selected recommendations. And we agree with that, and certainly that it would be balanced against the revenues.
Start to finish, please.
Yes, okay. Just quickly, we believe that, again, this is the issue around going out for an RFP that I think, and the general manager said, we recommend that you talk to the jurisdictions again before you engage Matrix for the RFP. I think one of the issues that's come up from the jurisdictions is I think they want to know that the community is supportive of that. And so I don't know, you're going to need to do some type of other community engagement to determine the level of support. And these are forums that are helpful, but maybe there's some other ways you're going to have to gauge that.
All right, thank you very much.
You.
I think we've heard a number of people say.
Who are you?
My name is Greg Collis. I've been resident here since '94. I think we've heard a number of people say, and I'm going to echo it. Let's keep the $12,000. Let's spend it on our police. Let's work together as a community to improve our local police. Matrix has written odd things, hasn't included the fact that you can lower benefits and increase salary. They've skewed the numbers so much that even that, with that, they couldn't make a case for contracting out. You can do RFPs more locally with the chief in charge. I just spoke with everybody else. Let's not spend the money on Matrix. Let's fix our police in-house.
police services. We have a very prickly community and lots of opinions. We've caused some of the problems that we've caused the problems that we're dealing with right now. Woe be the group that takes us on. If it's not ourselves, El Cerrito would be in a world of pain if they take us on too. So we ought to really think about fixing our own problem here, and I support keeping our protection services here.
Good evening, my name is Ryan Anderson. I am a Kensington resident. I am a working parent with 2 kids at KHS school. And I want to say I'm grateful to all stakeholders involved on all sides of the issue for efforts to evolve the services in our community. And I just want to say thanks for everyone for their opinions and as we evolve this into a respectful process. I did want to make a comment on a few of the other comments. Moving forward with gathering data does not amount to a dismantling of our public services. And I feel there were some characterizations that some of the alternatives being explored amounted to effectively dismantling and a reduction in the health and safety of our community. I've got kids in the community. I would never support anything that went in that direction. And I think some of the proposals here are very responsible. And I think any movement towards a measured acquisition of more data to make more informed decisions on budgets in excess of millions of dollars as a taxpayer and homeowner, I think is very responsible. And I'm supportive of any efforts to gather information and make more informed decisions for the decades to come for myself and for my kids. So, thank you. One last thing. I don't actually see a lot of KHS parents here because a lot of them likely work long hours and are helping kids with homework. I believe, and this is my opinion, there's probably a bit of a bias in the age and the representation. There are people in this community, there's a characterization of a vast majority of people falling on one side of an issue. I actually don't agree with that. People in my peer group and my age group are very pro-data, pro-sensible decisions, and I think a lot of them are actually supportive of exploring more information and supportive of some of these efforts. So I don't want to speak for them, but I think the statement earlier was incorrect.
My name is Andrew Harris. We've been kicking this problem down the road for the last 20 years. The fire service in this community was also in chaos a long time ago. The solution to that was to bring order to it, and it turned out to be contracting out to El Cerrito. It's an award-winning fire service. Now, there's a dichotomy that keeps being expressed that you either hate the police department or you love them. And I think the last speaker really spoke to the issue, and that's that we need to get information, and based on information, we know which way to proceed. Now, we've wasted money before on cars for chiefs, motorcycles that nobody could drive, and other kinds of issues. $12,000 to get the basis, to get information, to get an RFP that's going to give us information to move forward is important. It may be that nobody really wants to contract with this dysfunctional village because it really is dysfunctional. So, I really support that we put out the RFP, and it may be that we end up keeping our police force as is and trying to upgrade it. The problem has been, in the past, questions of leadership. And for ages, we have been defending the indefensible. And in addition to that, now we have a poison pill ordinance that supposedly is supposed to be voted on, but that remains to be seen where it has any legal merit. So, I don't know that any agency would really want to mess with us. But one of the things I do know is when I talk to people outside, they think we live in a very funny place. And that's not good for property prices, that's not good for a reputation, but it does not change the view. So please move forward on the RFP. Thank you.
that we don't seem to have enough money to do anything else is what the conclusion that LAFCO said and that what these people are saying. And also, I was on the side of the people having a problem with the police department many years ago, and that was because it was hooked to the general manager, and it was all just a big problem. So we have a new situation that we've gotten together. We've got the general manager split from the police department, all this, but it doesn't seem like we've given much of a chance for anything to happen. Yeah, there's been bad management, but it seems like it's getting better and better all the time. And I am like other people that I've heard say that, I don't want to be, I never thought I'd be up here standing here saying that I'm for a police department to begin with, but our police department is very friendly. El Cerrito people, they scare me. I'm sorry. They're not friendly. They're not going to be friendly. So anyways, yes, it's been going on a long time. The same conclusion keeps being reached. Please save our $12,000. Thank you.
John Gushion here, and if it matters, I've lived here over 25 years. After 2 elections, the makeup of this board disproves Linda's notion that a vast majority of residents support option 1. That just isn't true. I know she likes the idea, but that's fine, that's her idea. I'd also like to say that I'd like to see the board move ahead and approve the RFP for options 2 and 3. I think it's time to start the process. Thank you.
My name is David Bergen. Can you hear me? Good. I'm also of the opinion that we should spend the $12,000 for researching what we can do to an RFP. $12,000 may sound like a lot of money to you, but if you look at the entire cost of our police department, it's in the noise in an engineering term. It's just a very small amount. So basically, I'd like the board to get us an RFP so that we will know what is available out there and hopefully also how much it would cost. And I'd further like to say that the board has been doing a very nice job, and I commend them for that.
This gentleman said a lot of what I was going to say. Oh, my name is Maria McCauley. So I'll just add, it just seems like after all these years and all this money, again, I'm not saying just exactly what he said, $12,000 is nothing, but after all the money that has been spent over all these years, why not just go ahead with that little final piece of the process and just do the RSP, get that last piece of data, and put the thing to bed completely once and for all, whatever the answer turns. And just for the record, I like our police department. My experience with our police department has always been positive. So I'm not strong one way or the other. I agree. Just get that last little piece of data and close it up.
Good evening, Jim Watt. I'm actually not here to talk about the 3 different options that we're talking about, but on page 3 of the report that came out here, there is a reference to the fact that we're talking about hiring an interim general manager, an interim police chief. I don't know if in fact that is what you're going to be voting on tonight. wasn't in the recommendations, but it is in the beginning, and it was mentioned again by our general manager. And I would like to have more of an explanation as to what is actually the purpose of hiring an interim general manager. What it said, I'm sorry?
Chief of Police.
Interim Chief of Police. What it says there is that in all possibility, that interim Chief of Police will be restricted to 960 hours. And he cannot get a salary in excess of the current interim Chief of Police. So if that person is hired, and if that is part of what you're going to be deciding tonight, I would like to know why are we hiring an interim Chief of Police on a half-time basis, because 96 hours is less than half of the 2,040 hours of a full-time job. What is the purpose of that, and is that in fact the intention of tonight's meeting to in fact include the possibility of an interim Chief of Police?
Would the board like me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
The Chief of Police is hired by the General Manager, and so does not require Board of Directors approval. So this is not on the agenda. This is at the discretion of the General Manager. I'm informing the board that that's my intent. The reason to hire an interim chief is to assist the General Manager, number one, and also to provide someone who has experience working in other agencies a perspective on working in the department and the services that's fresh and from the outside.
One more comment, and then that will be it. One more comment. Yeah.
Good. No.
I'm actually on the other end of an RFP right now in Manhattan with a little bit of a different crime rate than we have here. And I can tell you one thing that people on the other side of an RFP really hate is indecisiveness. And what I really hear here is a lot of indecisiveness. And I think if you're going to ask for an RFP, that you all need to get off the pot and decide what you really want. And maybe be honest with the community for a change. Do you want a full contract or a hybrid? Make up your mind, because you're going to waste everybody else's time. Thanks.
Peter Dora. You hired a very competent general manager, and he just suggested that before we put an RFP out, we just walk across the boundary to Albany, El Cerrito, and ask them. So why don't we take that as the first step and find out if anybody is interested, will we waste another $12,000? Thank you.
Yes, I actually had some quick questions. They're both fiscal and related to what we're doing. It's related to the general manager report. First off, I'm just sort of curious, why is it we still haven't paid some of Matrix's bills if we knew that we owed them money since November 2018?
We didn't, that bill was lost in the system. I wasn't aware of it until recently. We were reviewing it and didn't approve it at that time, because we're still reviewing it, but it is a valid bill and they are entitled to that payment.
This was obtained in an RFP, in a PRA request a while ago. This letter is dated then, and so then why is it in your general manager's report you do not tell us that the actual amount we owe them is $62,000?
I think that was an oversight by Matrix. I think we probably agreed that really they're entitled to it, and it was just an oversight.
So you're saying you forgot to tell the community we actually owe them about an extra $12,000 in your report?
No, actually, he just told us this evening, so he's clarified.
It's not, I hope that's going to go on the website so everyone knows that. Additionally, about this thing where you say that we run $24,000 a year in legal fees, is that only police bills or is that also all civilian costs?
It's total legal bills, and Kensington does have a history of very high legal bills, unreasonably high, and it is something that we need to address long-term in the community. The legal bills for such a small community are just unacceptably high, and they've ranged about $240,000 total per year. Now this year, they have gone down actually. I'm sorry, last year.
But these are not related to police operations, is what you're saying. It's not all police operations, because I know at least
it's total.
Yeah, so that includes the 300,000 spent on the writ of mandate.
Well,
that you are not indicating here, that the civilian costs are being bundled into
it's averaged over $240,000 a year for the last 3 years.
Well, you have to understand that before 2017, the legal costs were not apportioned to different categories for police and for administrative. So we could spool those out with a lot of staff time, but we've chosen not to.
I ran all of the bills, literally. I did a quick scan through analysis before I came here, like at 4 o'clock.
But the item that we have on discussion is...
I'm just saying, because this is misleading to the community.
Well, I think the community is very aware of the cost of the writ. I think we spent several years discussing, Mr. Kruger alone would be responsible for maintaining, and I mean this in no disrespect, I mean it in great respect. He has continuously, and lots of residents have discussed our legal issues and expensive legal bills. It's not something that we seek to continue.
But I'd like to ask, why did you put it in your report if it was not necessarily related to police operations and we're discussing police operations?
Well, many of those bills were police related, and
let's see, it's a total of about 700,000 approximately. 300,000 on the writ of mandate.
But the writ of mandate, you could argue, is also a police expenditure because it had to do with taking of a vote to on whether to extend the contract for the existing general manager and chief of police.
That was a civilian brought issue about how the board was conducting its business, not about anything the police department did.
It related to Reno.
No.
That is a lie.
It was between you and us.
Well, can I respond to that too? I think the police bills were not tracked that closely years ago. We have set up a separate account for police legal services more recently, and we're separating that distinctly, but both are too high.
Well, I'm saying because the way you write this is misinterpreting the situation to the town, and that is not...
I disagree. As a board member, I disagree, and I think that that was never the intention. I think to assume intention of the general manager.
I do not say that was his intention. I'm saying that's the end result.
I disagree, and so respectfully, I think that, and if we have miscommunication, we can seek clarification, which is what we're doing here this evening. So.
Director Duffy, do you have any comments on the matrix proposal?
Actually, I'm not done. Don't worry. This is from Mr. Brady. I had a question. So you mentioned in your thing that in previous analyses developed by Chief Brown Taylor and other assessments, I was wondering, when were you going to tell the board of directors clearly that Chief Brown Taylor was actually one of your associates for your company in 2009? This is a report from Lafayette.
Brown Taylor was a contract.
Brown Taylor was a contract employee for our firm before he came to work for Kensington.
May I read this? He has more than 35 years as a police manager and law enforcement consultant. Worked with Matrix since its inception.
That's true. And that report was done before it was your contract date?
This was done in 2009.
Then that's when the final report was done, and the work was done before that.
I'm just saying, when were you going to let us know about this?
I told them that. I told the board that when we were hired.
This information was discussed before we hired me. Matrix and at the meeting where we hired Matrix also. This is not new information.
Okay, we need to move on.
Well, may I please have a chance to go through my report on this?
If you're quick, because we need to move on. We have a couple of other items on the agenda.
Okay, so I just want to quickly help everyone go through this. I spent about maybe 2 or 3 weeks doing this after I did my own work, so this was almost like a part-time effort. I went through all the old Kensington Police District police reports to draw the numbers, and where there was a blank, I PRA'd Albany for their statistics. So I have in total about 8 years worth of data points in this. Not 6 months, 8 years. What I found is that calls for service averaged about 7.4 per day, and that in some ways calls for service does not actually represent what the police are doing around the community, because in those reports there's often a lot of other police activities, and if you combine calls for service with police activities, you end up with the officers on average doing at least 17.8 things per day. That is recorded things. Because essentially you do not necessarily record everything you do, and everyone's obsession with statistics misses the fact that someone has to input that data. And so really I want to point out that, and also this is one other issue about the data, is that I talked to Albany. They were not very amused with the statistical data on our queue time and response time. And the lieutenant there was like, yeah, do not associate me with this in any way, because we told them the CAD data cannot, the raw CAD data does not give you accurate data. I have that as an email, so you can shake your head all you want. Essentially, the other thing I really wanted to point out is that such statistical data misses how the police deter crime. You know, they are rolling around town, people see them, they stop at places in town to slow down traffic, and essentially, you are talking about a police force that will diligently investigate even the most petty things. When was the last time in Berkeley someone's like, yeah, I'm going to go take your stolen bike report and I'll look into it. You're like, fill the form, go away, we have homicides to deal with. And so really what I wanted to do is this B1 slide is just the clippings from the police blotters that used to be put out, and just to give you a flavor of the sort of self-initiative and care that the officers would take for the police. Finally, and really the last point that I want to make is that historically there has been no data that suggests contracting out is going to give us any sort of massive cost savings or anything. And so even LAFCOs, like saying your priority 1 calls are better, you essentially pay the same amount per head for your police services in 2011. And I actually went through and checked what the per head count was currently, and depending on if you want to count it, we're still either equal or cheaper than El Cerrito per individual in town. And lastly, for everyone who talks about the ad hoc committee report, I bring you to figure 14 on that report, which looks at operational costs of the police and the fire district since 1996, which is 1 year after the contract was signed. And so really, one of the blots that really caught my eye was number 24, where when they say, according to data compiled for the KFP board, using the board packet, during this period, the cost of contract increased by more than 5% 6 times, and more than 11% twice. That is what contracting out is going to get you. And that is the historical example of right now contracting out with our nearest partner.
Thank you. Director Duffy?
Oh, and actually, this is a picture of me having gone on a ride, and this really caught my eye. This is one of our 10-year-old, our plus 10-year-old computers from Albany, which we got from our Albany dispatch contract, that's currently missing because the officers are having to have it gone for refurbishing and repaired. How many of you have actually sat in that car, asked them what the problems are, asked them what their day is like?
Right.
I think 4.
stop bullying your fellow board members.
I'm not bullying you, I'm asking.
Yes, you are!
You need
No.
to stop.
No.
Passionate.
We're entering a degree of passion that exceeds civil discourse. We serve thousands of hours, hundreds of thousands of hours in the service of this district. We do not do so because we disrespect, dislike, or disagree with the idea of excellent police services. We do so because we are committed to bringing those to ourselves, to our families, and to our neighbors.
Let me read a political statement. Actually, if anyone wants to listen better, you can read later.
Stop it. Just stop it. Act like an adult. Please stop.
Yeah.
Who's voting now?
We want to have an orderly meeting. Director Deputy.
It's okay now, so, I don't want to get into the pros and cons of contracting, trying to compare to the fire district. I'm on the side of getting more information. We have come a long way. This has been lingering in the community for a long time. It's been discussed, well, probably in 20 years, 10 years certainly. That this, there's the ad hoc committee, which I'm pretty familiar with, Brown Taylor, and now the Matrix study. And until we get information from the other agencies via MRP, we really don't have all the information. We've got a lot that we don't. Matrix's phase 2 had estimates of what a contract might cost, what it might look like. We don't know, really. We really don't know what it's going to end up being. Putting out an RFP, having it created and putting it out, I think is the only sensible thing after we've come this far. Even if an agency doesn't, if no one responds to it, and I'm assuming we could always reissue it later or someone could respond later. I think Matrix has spent a lot of time and energy and the mind share is in this. If they're going to do an RFP, now's the time to have them do it. We don't want to have to come back 6 months or a year later and say, hey, by the way, we're ready for an RFP now. I think now is the time. And I don't see any harm in putting it out. I do think we should discuss what a full-service RFP might ask for. There's been talk about not raising taxes. Well, our Matrix did a really impartial analysis of our current department, and their estimate is what $700,000 to $800,000 to fix what we've got already. And if no one's willing to spend money on what we've got already, maybe a full-service contract could be scaled down a bit as well. Maybe it doesn't have to be a hybrid, but I think there's a lot of options to explore. But to just cut it off and not do it, to me, makes no sense. I'm fully in favor of putting out an RFP and getting responses. And again, I'll defer the pros and cons of contracting. I think Matrix has done a lot of studies in other parts of the state that shows that contracting cities actually pay far less than non-contracting agencies. But that can come when we get a response.
Director Shearswell.
Thank you, General Manager, for the depth and thoroughness of your staff report. It is very much appreciated. I think, while lengthy, it is succinct and gives us wonderful direction for moving forward. I have watched since 2014, along the development of the ad hoc committee, and along with the ad hoc committee members, and I think Ms. Conkus and myself and Gutierrez as were one of the few people that were at those meetings. And thank all of them for their hard work. What I love about this staff report is that the three alternatives listed do not need to be mutually exclusive right now. As Mr. Anderson, I think, said, that what we're doing now is that we are gathering data. There is a history of the board issuing RFPs, unfortunately, that have only received one bidder. That happened with Bayview Refuse in 2014. We hope that that doesn't happen again this time. I am very much appreciating the comments made by Gail Feldman on behalf of the KPOA board. I'm going to suggest that we not continue private discussions with other public agencies because as of late I've received a lot of public records request acts, assuming that I as a board member am in conversation with these agencies at this point. And I think preventing the idea that any board member is going forward and kind of trying to finagle an RFP for a certain outcome would be an unfortunate assumption. So I think that going forward with a public request for proposal is the way that I would like to see us go.
Thank you. Vice President Desai?
I have a question for Richard, if you wouldn't mind getting up, so I can respond with the microphone. And I agree with, I had a similar thought to Director Saraswat that these are not mutually exclusive, and in every case, we need to look at partnering with other agencies for some help. This is really I view it as a very much a structural problem of being a very small department. And I had similar thoughts to Mr. Fitzsimmons about, how to structure an RFP that is really like a pyramid, where there are certain services outlined in option 1, certain services also outlined in option 2, all the way into a full contracting, none of which costs us any more of your dollars toward your work. So I want to know a little bit about how we would approach that with other agencies, how they would reply to something like that, if you have any experience with multiple levels of service requests for the RFP.
Well, I think essentially what you're asking is you're turning it over to your neighbors and non-neighbors like the sheriff and other agencies to come up with new ideas, that can help you. In your first part of your comment, we were talking about agency assistance to each other. Most agencies are looking for that kind of help now. Even Los Angeles Police Department is partnering with other agencies in Los Angeles, an agency of over 10,000 law enforcement personnel. They have to because they can't provide everything themselves. The smaller you get, the more important that is. So we've provided some ideas based on best practices for small law enforcement agencies. I think we use that as a standard to help evaluate what your needs are in an independent agency and what you would look for in a contract. But it's not everything. So you're looking for an open-ended kind of opportunity for them to provide you with ideas.
Thank you. That is actually what I think would be beneficial. And I also want to reiterate that this is not personal, and this is not about criticizing the services I've seen or received. In fact, I witnessed just maybe, last weekend or the weekend before, I have an elderly neighbor who I check in on once in a while, and she's been having a lot of difficulties. I saw firsthand how our fire service and our police services worked together, how they helped her, how they made use of our key program, how the time and care and attention are important. And I want to reiterate as well, I will not make a move that I think is going to diminish the safety of my children and of my elderly neighbors and of anybody in the community. I think we need help, and I think we have to put it out there and see what happens. And unlike the community center RFP process was extremely rigorous and is the documents that are prepared are a binding legal contract. Every single measurement, every expectation is outlined because it is a legal requirement and standard that the contractors must abide by everything in those documents. In this case, we have a more creative and free-flowing opportunity to work together in partnership with other agencies and to see what might be possible. And I also agree that we need this data. And if nobody responds, that is also a data point. And spending the time and effort, especially right now as we're fresh on this process, with Matrix, we've spent a lot of time with the community, with our department's data and knowing us over this time to craft ways we could partner, even if it doesn't work out this time for some reason. I think that it's change is slow, and we're going to be investing in our department one way or the other. This is not a fast process, no matter what happens. And so we should put in writing the kinds of things we want to partner with. And I do believe it's going to be serving us really well and will be money very well spent.
I had a quick question. How do we avoid lowballing? Like where they promise us something that sounds really good on paper, but then in 5 years, like, oops, your special contract is up, it raises 200% or something. Like what Comcast does to people. Get a free $20 for the first 5 months, and then suddenly you're locked into a $200 contract for 4 years.
Why don't we ask Richard to help us understand that process better?
How much money would that?
Somebody's talked earlier about the importance of contract management, and that's an important part of it to monitor costs as they're incurred. That's an important part of board oversight for this process and coming up with a contract where cost escalators are known and are defined by actual changes that you want as well as changes that they incur, such as negotiating contracts with employees, which is a risk associated with that.
Well, I guess I'll use the fire board contract as an example. So they got the contract, they disbanded their fire department and everything, and then suddenly they come up for negotiations and they're like, we don't have a fire department, and El Cerrito does everything. What do we do? They're like saying, El Cerrito's like, take it or leave it, see what happens, and then they're like, we raised all our CalPERS, or we gave everyone a 15% raise. How do we control that?
What I think you might want to do, Director Madavi, is to talk to the fire board and understand the contract and why it increased, because my understanding is that we're paying a certain portion of their personnel costs, and it's those personnel costs that have gone up, and they have gone up in part because of CalPERS. So I would suggest that you address that with the fire board.
I mean, I just remember Janice Kosel's comment. She said, we have no negotiating power.
That's right.
Well, you do have negotiating power because there's a benefit to them as well. If you contract with another agency, you're helping to defer their administrative costs. That's of value to them. They have abilities to have special enforcement or other kinds of things that they couldn't do without a partner. You're a partner with them. Even small agencies do that. Montessorino contracts with Los Gatos. They have that same arrangement, and Los Gatos benefits from having small, about the same sizes as Kensington, community contracting and partnering with them.
I would like to also just get back to the issue of lowballing, and that is one reason why the initial, RFP, and I mean, this is now speculating very far down the road, but that we would want to make sure that, that the costs are known and that it'd be obvious to professionals.
Excuse me, it's 9:45.
Okay.
And I'm going to make a motion that we extend the meeting time to 10:30. And I want to make comments, but I think we need to move on.
Sit down.
No, I have a question.
I will second that motion.
Okay. Director Madavi?
Actually, I have a quick question.
We have to vote on extending
Director
the meeting.
Madavi, we have a vote on, we have a motion and a second. What is your vote?
Aye.
Director Deppie?
Yes.
Director Sherrill-Swat?
Yes.
Vice President Desai?
Aye.
Okay, and I will also vote, that's 5-0, but we need to move on.
May I make a motion?
Do you have I haven't spoken yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd like to speak, sorry. Okay. I have a question, actually, Richard. When we're talking about the $12,000, we're talking not about a letter that you're going to be sending, but this would be a document that would be something that would I don't want to call it a legally binding contract, but it would have certain provisions and terms in there that we could use if we wanted to, let's say we sent out the RFP and we didn't get the response that we liked, but 5 years from now, we could update that at, I would assume, a minimal cost.
Of course.
Yeah.
But the $12,000 includes working with you to help define what would be in a request for proposal,
Yeah.
developing the request for proposal, helping you evaluate the responses that you get, and then helping you develop the contract.
Okay, well that's, okay, so it's evaluating the responses and developing the contract too.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I am of two minds with respect to the RFP. I hear the comments about taking more time to evaluate it, but I also, and I do think some of the Brown Taylor work started in 2006, actually, when I looked on the website.
There were two reports.
Yeah, and so this has been a very long time in process, and I think getting the information, and I'm especially interested in what services might be provided. We're all aware that policing has gotten a lot more complicated. There's a lot more report writing. There's a lot more work that is involving police work. It's not the same thing. My uncle was a cop in Chicago, and it's not the same life that you have. But the other issue too, and we can't lose sight of this, is it is really difficult to recruit law enforcement officers. All law enforcement agencies, with few exceptions, are hurting for law enforcement officers. It's not a career path that people are taking. And there's been more of agencies working together. So I think that the idea of going out with a request for proposal, looking at what services they might be able to offer us, would help us if we wanted to keep our department, as we mentioned, training and human resource and recruiting. And also I think on some of the evidence work and storage and record keeping, right now we are actually contracting for dispatch, and we've been contracting for dispatch for a number of years. So we're already in a hybrid model, frankly. And this is just an expansion of that. So
President, I had a quick question. It's technical, very technical. So I pulled all the officer, our staffing counts, and really we only start to have recruiting problems a bit into 2016. I'm wondering, is that when the crunch started, or why is it throughout like 2010 to 2016 we had like a complement of nearly 10 or 9 active officers?
well, and some of them were on administrative leave for some time, so thank you. Please don't interrupt. I am going to make a motion that we approve the RFP for Matrix.
I actually make a counter motion that we thank Matrix. They've done interesting work that has
There's a
stimulated
motion on the table right now. Is there a second?
I will second the motion.
Okay.
Point of clarification, is that for, is that the staff
2
recommendation?
and 3? Yes.
Staff recommendation 1?
1 and 2.
All right, I'm going to make a motion that we ask that we direct Matrix Consulting Group to present the RFP to the board.
Can I ask a question? I think Matrix alluded to the fact that they'd like to work with somebody and drafting their RFP. Who would that be?
It's really, we'd like to authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with Matrix for a cost not to exceed $12,000 to prepare the request for proposal for specific police functions, alternate 2, and the full contract, alternate 3.
We don't need an agreement. We already have an agreement with Matrix. It's just a matter of authorizing them to go ahead with this part of the agreement.
Okay. So the motion is to authorize Matrix to do the RFP for alternates 2 and 3.
Can we identify? It would seem that there are elements of option 1 that will be, yeah.
And then can we identify that perhaps a committee of the, can I add a caveat, that a committee of the general manager, interim chief of police, can I ask director, deputy, and vice president Hassan to consider the hybrid options that are listed in the RFP presented to the board?
You want that to be as direction of staff, or it can be a motion either way is fine.
Yes, direction of the staff.
For one motion?
Okay, we can do it in one motion. That's fine.
So,
Does the amendment to the motion have a second?
I'll second the motion. I'll second the amendment.
I already seconded
motion?
I think it would be helpful to restate the motion as to approve approve the portion of the agreement that directs Matrix to proceed with the RFP and to appoint the general manager, vice president Hasaj, and director deputy to work with Matrix to develop the RFP and to bring it back to the board. And the interim chief of police on hybrid options.
Well, move on. Wait. Okay. All right. So we have the motion that's stated by our general counsel and the amendment. I made the motion. Vice President Chair Swat seconded it.
Vice President Hasai seconded the motion, the original motion.
Right. Right. And then the amendment was proposed by Director Sheriff Swat, and I seconded it. So I will now take a vote. Director Madavi? No. Director Deppie?
Yes.
Director Cheryl Swat?
Yes.
Director Hasai?
Yes.
And I will vote yes, so it passes 4-1.
May I make another motion?
Yes.
I would like to make a motion that the board direct the general manager to consider his recommendations for alternative 1 and implement what recommendations can be made at this time, which include, as best in his ability, the following recommendations that seem to fit: increasing staffing, filling vacant reserve positions, exploring contract services with another police department, which is actually included in our previous motion, and training improvements for all sworn personnel.
I will second that motion.
Director Madavi?
Well, I guess as long as improving the police department in some way, aye.
Director Deppie?
Yes.
Director Sheriff Swat?
Yes.
Director Hasai?
Yes.
And I will vote yes too, so the motion passes 5-0. All right. Okay, we're now moving on to new business item 7C, draft sections 4,000 and 4010. Could our general counsel?
Well, thank you, Madam President. The agenda is part of the paper here. I just wanted to get to the right page. So this is the one of the sections of the policy and procedures manual. And I think we covered a little bit why this is being done, that it's a government document that creates consistencies, that consistent organization throughout time for Kensington, and it conforms to state laws. The current policies have a number of outdated policies, and even include sections that are really not even appropriate for a policy manual. This particular section, I'll just review a few of the sections to highlight some changes, and the general counsel may have additional comments, and the board may want to have additional discussion on this in the public. The first change of the standing committees, I don't know, maybe you want to take a small intervention? Okay. So the current policy 4,000 replaces the existing 4,000 and 5,000. So one of the changes that's noted is that the current policy has 3 standing committees: solid waste, emergency preparedness, and finance. And the new policy would keep the finance committee as a standing committee and allow the board to use temporary advisory committees such as solid waste, emergency preparedness, and other needs and other issues on an as-needed basis. So only one committee would be a standing committee. Another item to call your attention is the change changes is the process for creating an agenda and placing items on the agenda. In the revised process, a director may request the general manager to place an item on the agenda. If the general manager does not believe that it should be on the agenda, two directors can request that the item be placed on the agenda, essentially overriding the general manager in that case. And the member of the public can follow the same procedure. They can request one director or two directors, and that item has been placed on the agenda. So that's a new process for the public and the board to placing an item on the agenda. Let's see, the other section is the minutes section, which are, of course, create a number of comments from last year. I wanted to note that the revised section talks about action minutes and gives parameters of what should be in the minutes, but that is also a change from current practices. And it also states that recordings will remain on the website for a period of 5 years. So these are just a highlight of a few of the major changes. There are other changes also, and I'll turn it over to the board or if the general counsel wants to add to that.
I would like to make a few clarifications, if I may, and then talk just for a moment about the process. First, there is maybe some confusion about the agenda itself. The agenda calls out specifically draft policies 4000 and 4010. In fact, 4010 is simply a part of 4000. It's not a separate item. Secondly, it was pointed out to me that in the drafting and redrafting of this document, there were some errors made in updating cross-references. Unfortunately, that, in my experience, is often inevitable. So the following corrections will be, assuming that the board directs us to bring this back, that we would be correcting a couple of cross-references. There's one mistaken cross-reference in policy 4120.1. There's another mistake in 4170.2.2. Again, this often happens when a document is extensively revised, and I apologize for that. If I may spend a few minutes on the process. And first, one more clarification, I'm sorry. We're taking this to the board in pieces, in large part because there's a lot to digest, and we thought it would be easier if we broke it down. However, because we're using the numbering system that was used by the model promulgated by the California Special District Association, they have different numbering than ours does. So to the extent that we're leaving our existing policy in place until we step forward with the new replacement policies, we're coming up with some conflicts. So one of the things we will propose, assuming that the board wishes to proceed with this, is that we temporarily renumber the current policy series 3000 as 6000. Eventually, the current 3000 will be replaced by an updated policy. But in the meantime, it will have its own number, so there will not be a conflict with the new 3000 that we're presenting for your consideration tonight. Lastly, if I may spend a moment on the process, for the purposes of all of these revisions, the existing policy 1010 governs. The amendments have already been initiated by both the board and the director. And the next step was submitting a written draft of proposed amendment, each director and the manager. That has occurred. The board has to consider the new amendment policy at a regular meeting before it may adopt the proposal at the second regular meeting. That is what we are asking of the board to do tonight. Third, assuming that the board decides to proceed, the board must adopt the proposal by a 4/5 vote of the entire board at a regular meeting. If the board decides to proceed with the proposed draft changes, we can return them to the board on the agenda for the next regular meeting on May 23rd, or potentially a regular meeting in June. Of course, during the board's consideration tonight, it may direct staff to make changes to the policies that are before them. That's, of course, to be expected. Ultimately, we would like to get board direction, assuming that the board wishes to proceed with these new policies,
to come back with a resolution, changing the numbering, repealing the policies to be replaced, and adopting the new ones. And with that, town manager and I are available for any questions.
I have a question about process. If we make any changes to this, do we need to have 2 clean readings, or can it still come back for 1 more reading and then be adopted?
I think that the presumption would be that since you have 1 meeting for consideration, and the only purpose of that would be to allow for some changes, unless the changes were really very drastic, such that we could not truly describe them this evening, that you'd be in danger of running into this series of meetings if you continue to have a consideration meeting every time somebody changes anything.
Are there any public comments on section 4000?
I'm going to read something that Mabry Benson wrote because she is unable to be here tonight. And it's specifically for the 4000 series. The first comment is about minutes. And Mabry served on the ad hoc committee, and so what she had on the ad hoc committee were action minutes. So this is now Mabry, and I'm reading her text. Action minutes are useless for providing a historical report of what really happened. It is not just the votes that are important. More important is why something happened or didn't happen, the arguments for and against. I understand the cost of preparing minutes, but just looking / or listening to the video or the audio is a real obstruction to reviewing what happened. From her own personal experience, I can't just fast forward through other portions. Now, Mabry is very savvy with the computer. One solution she offers is that you make a log of the recording. For example, at 5 minutes and 10 seconds, resident so-and-so spoke on topic A or topic B. Or at 45 minutes and 15 seconds, the director reported on a solid waste contract or whatever that person spoke about. And keeping the audio for 3 years or even 5 years is really insufficient time for these videos. People really, our community issues have gone further back, more than 10 years, and Andrew Gutierrez said 20 years. They've gone back a long time. So to remove the source material that we rely on when we have to go back is simply not a good idea. Item 2, she says. There is the question then of whether the policy and procedures govern or are they simply advisory. And that was basically the source of the writ. And Mabry writes, the board has maintained that the policy and procedures are merely advisory, yet rule of law is the cornerstone of our democracy. It is totally reasonable for citizens to expect that their governing bodies to follow their own adopted procedures and for them to seek redress if needed. When policy and procedures are only advisory, the question is, at whose discretion are policy and procedures selectively administered? When rules are at the discretion of a government official, as was the case with the writ, we essentially have a dictatorship by that official. We had some other things, and I will eliminate them, be interested.
First comment has to do with the Emergency Preparedness Committee. I would recommend not dropping it as a standing committee. On the emergency preparedness.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I speak as fast. It isn't a transitory issue, as is implied by I think, the eliminating it and making it suggestive of a temporary committee. And I will also point to the fire board, which is in the process of creating an emergency preparedness committee as a standing committee. And in fact, you may want to think about coordinating in some fashion with the fire board as a joint emergency preparedness committee. That would seem to make more sense. Some type of a memorandum of understanding or agreement where you would have a joint committee. Because if you look at communities that are not special districts, they all have a coordinated effort on emergency preparedness between fire and police. Just because we have two special districts doesn't mean we shouldn't coordinate in that fashion, frankly. You also have optional committees, I think, listed in there, and it wasn't quite clear to me what that meant. I could understand temporary, but I couldn't understand what the optional meant at all. So
Are you talking about the coordinators?
no. There's says optional committees. You have temporary, you have standing, and then I believe you have optional. And again,
Yeah, but those seem redundant.
yeah, or what it means in the first place. So, anyways, I mean, that is my point. I did actually go back and look at the issue of at will, and there isn't in the old policy and procedures manual anything about at will. There's a memorandum of understanding with the district secretary, which does suggest that management could relieve her or him from duties, but at the same time it gives the individual the opportunity to grieve the termination of will. So I'm going to go back again on policy 3000 and suggest that you do follow what all the other jurisdictions, public jurisdictions do, as opposed to making it at will for at least those employees. So thank you very much.
I was going to give some clarification. When we discussed, President Natoli and myself discussed how the committees might look, the Finance Committee we knew needed to be retained as a standing committee, but the consideration to take coordinators to the elemental level, we had kind of a lot of coordinators floating around, committees floating around with possibility, but in years past they had not been filled. In fact, for the first 2 years I was on the board, there was no emergency services committee because I asked the then president 2 years in a row if he would please appoint, not myself, but another director to that role, and he declined to appoint Director Toombs to that role and to pick it up, and so that we would have some emergency services coordination going on. So we thought that with these 5 coordinators, what you have is you have board directors that are working within the purview of the KPPCSD. That was important, that we didn't extend our authority over other issues that are actually not our responsibility at this time, and that we covered as many different possibilities as we could. So we do have an emergency services coordinator who of course any emergency services coordination would need to be working in conjunction with community relations and also working in conjunction with our special district coordinator. So that was the idea behind that. Of course, just one moment. I also believe that we need to have both optional committee and temporary committee. They're slightly different. And the idea, I think, is that an optional committee can begin and does not have a time limit for conclusion.
Just a comment. I apologize for coming up and doing it again, but let me just comment on that emergency service coordinator. It is specific as they read it here with the development of the local hazard mitigation plan. Now, the way you described it, Michelle, is far broader than just coordinating in the development of the local hazard mitigation plan.
That's true. I mean, but part of the intention is also of adopting a new policy and procedures manual, which I would assume that we would abide by and would be rules that we would follow. That is the point of following the template of the CSDA, having a lot of legal consultation to establish policies that are legal, and formally adopting a policy and procedure manual that we know is binding. Is also that...
I just want to make one comment on that, though. If the language says shall, that is binding. If it says may, then that's permissive. And so it's going to be dependent on the actual provision, whether it's binding or not. I mean, if it says you may include something, that is permissive. If it says you must include, that's not permissive. It's what you're bound to.
There's also an issue of norms, and force of law. And unfortunately, the Policy and Procedures Manual does not have a force of law, but it is a norm to be respected. And I think that's the difference between what the law requires, what is law, legal, and what is appropriate and expected. That's just how I, as a non-lawyer, read that. Maybe our general counsel could help clarify that on that issue.
I would say that the best practice is always to follow the directory.
Microphone, please, thanks.
Is it working?
No.
How about that? There we go.
I think the best practice is always to follow the directory statements, which, as President Matoli was indicating, are those that say shall or must, whereas the more advisory statements will say things like may or have discretion to, words like that clearly indicate that it's a permissive statement. These are obviously not the same as state laws or county laws. They can be changed by the board. And there is intended to be some flexibility when there is a reason to, but by and large, these are, when stated as mandatory, they are mandatory. Now, I wanted to offer, in the absence of our labor attorney, to speak to a couple of the issues that Mr. Staff raised about at-will versus other types of employment. In California, employment is presumed to be at-will unless there are explicit civil service protections or contract protections or something of that nature. There never has been any of that for the two staff positions that we're talking about here in Kensington. There is an MOU for a prior district secretary that Mr. Staff referenced. That MOU expired in I think it was 2008. And was not properly included as a policy anyway. It was not adopted by the board as a policy. So I would say that employment in the district among staff has always been at will. This 3,000, and I'm sure that's what Gwendolyn was talking about. The new 3,000 would really clarify that status. And one more point. Most larger agencies do in fact have some kind of what they call civil service protections. Whether or not they call them that, there is some process. Tiny agencies like Kensington, less often. I would not say it's standard for non-represented employees or employees without a contract to have any kind of protections like that. It is too often that there's no more work or there's no more money, and you just need to be able to have the flexibility to let people go.
I also think California law had something about the concept of implicit contract and the covenant of good faith and fair dealing built in.
Can I ask that we go back, however, we've strayed from policies 4,000 and we have closed policies 3,000. Must we continue on this line? Because I feel like we're running out of time and we've passed through policy 3,000. I have some things I'd like to say about policy 4,000.
I did want to clarify that the idea was that especially emergency services become sensibly the purview of the general manager with board oversight, which is the intention. I also have a couple quick points of clarification on page 11. The top there, policy 4140, it says 36 months. The staff report says 60. That should be changed to 60. With a
140 which?
4140.1.3, last line. And then in the listing, and I'm sorry, the formatting has not occurred yet. What would happen is we would like to present all the policy and procedures and then have everything formatted in a consistent way. 4140.1.5, if you scroll down there about halfway through, it says summary record of staff reports. That should be struck through because actually, if folks have a question about, they should go to the staff report. We should have an identifier for the staff report, not a summation, so that people are looking at the source material. That is the goal, that when there's questions, we shouldn't have an interpretation. We should have the original document.
Can I address my concerns?
Go ahead.
So on page 2, I like the idea of the flexibility on the committees, and I actually think we should consider that for the coordinators, and I believe that we should allow the board president to similarly, be able to appoint a coordinator that may not be listed here. I think this is a little too restrictive. And I also agree that emergency services really is the heart and soul of the police chief's job, the general manager's job, and it's really, really highly a staff function. They are professionals, and we, in our role as board oversight, will be watching that, pushing for that. And so I volunteered to work on the local hazard mitigation plan. I'm still willing to do that. I don't think we necessarily need to spell out an emergency services coordinator, because that should be the job of the staff and of the board really at all times, making sure that's happening. In addition, the special district coordinator would be working with the fire district. That would be one area that's happening. Community relations, it also happens. So I'm not worried about having it for this board term, for example, because you've appointed that. I'm worried about codifying it in the policy and procedure manual when it may not be appropriate. So having a shall and then perhaps striking emergency services and I don't know if anything else, community relations, that may or may not be an important thing to have all times, and then giving the option to do that. So that's just something to think about, whether we could, again, provide more flexibility.
Well, I think we can do that by just giving these as examples.
Okay.
We do have to have, though, a solid waste coordinator that is with the coordinating committee with the county. That's the only one that is truly mandated, I believe. But we could do that. We could just list these shall point as appropriate and necessary. Something like that.
And park service may also be another one to keep because it's such an important, it is another one of the important parts of the district that doesn't have a lot of resources behind it at this point. So I think it's great to have the flexibility. So I like that.
And I would argue for the special district coordinator.
Yeah, I was going to say LAFCO
is required. So I would argue for those 3, and then the others
can be examples.
Yeah, could be optional. But it's not, we thought about that there are 5 roles and there are 5 board directors, and that we would like to, make sure that everyone has an area that they're looking towards.
Would you please repeat those suggestions and we can see if there's board consensus around them?
So I think right now our consensus would be that, or what I propose is that we keep under shall the solid waste coordinator, the special district coordinator, and the park and rec coordinator. And that the others be, and then there be some language that would say the board president, which actually needs to be changed. It says board president may appoint additional coordinators, as
such as
appropriate, and you could list, if you want to list examples, but you don't have to list as appropriate.
Okay.
And we have appointed these.
Does the consensus of the board agree with that change?
I'm in favor of it.
I'm good. I'll go.
Actually, can I bring up another item that's really?
Well, I'm not finished. It does mean deleting them. They have been already appointed for the year. We can keep them. I'm also curious about the frequency of Finance Committee meetings, which says is set by the president. Now, if I understand this correctly, the president may or may not be one of the two board members, but I assume the reason the president is just dictating the frequency of the meetings is because the budgetary process must be adhered to, and the president is keeping that in mind as they are dictating the frequency.
We could have, yes, that's true, and we could have, it's not necessarily on a specific time schedule, but we could have the chair of the finance committee shall appoint and publicly announce.
If I may interrupt.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I'm talking about just dictating the frequency of the meetings. That's all I understand why that is.
Yeah, we could do that for the chair of the committee, but.
Okay.
Yeah, do we want to extend the meeting because it's 10:20, and I'm glad that clock was accurate. That was driving me nuts at the community center. It's perpetual.
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting till 10:45.
I'll second that motion.
Director Madavi?
Aye.
Director Debbie?
Yes.
Director Kasai?
Aye.
Director Sherswat?
Aye. Yes, I got Hasai and I, yes.
And I will also vote, so it carries 5-0.
So you think we should change the discretion to be to the board chair?
That's fine. I think probably the board president will be the chair of that anyway, but we could just, at the discretion of the committee chair, would be fine. And it's.
Well, is there one chair if there are two board members?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
That, is there a consensus at the meeting? February?
Yes,
For me, discretion of the finance committee chair.
It's fine with me.
And then I have one last comment. It is about,
What page?
I'm trying to find it.
While we're waiting, Director Madavi, you have?
4170.35.
What page, please?
4170.3.5, page 15, workshops.
Wait. Okay.
The board president may schedule a workshop to discuss the status of projects and any items of general information. If no action or direction is given by the board of directors at the workshop, no minutes will be prepared. Now, does that not sound like creating an avenue for secret meetings of the 5 board of directors that cannot be traced back to what they said or thought, or what they said amongst each other?
The meeting must still be public and noticed by the board.
Well, let's put it this way. Theoretically, we'd have a meeting at, say, 3 a.m. No one can come but us, and then we can talk.
That's not allowed.
I did not come.
I'm just saying that is a slippery slope towards secret meetings.
No, the idea is that you can have a team building exercise or a goal setting or, kind of discussion without taking minutes. Not that you have a meeting of the board. It's
in secret.
Of course, an agenda must be prepared. We've always prepared an agenda, and the 72-hour notice must be provided. So it's still under the Brown Act. It's just if there is no votes are taken. As soon as minutes where priorities are discussed, votes are taken, or staff is given directions, minutes must be taken.
Would it help if we said, if no action, if we put in some provision here saying that the workshop must be in compliance with the Brown Act, because it would have to be.
But that's assumed.
Yeah, I know it's assumed, but I'm just asking.
Well, I'm saying that, the lack of no minutes is the part that's really creeping me out, because that's what one does when they want to avoid having the public know what was said.
But
would it be recorded, this meeting?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't have to be. It could be, because it's where no priorities are discussed,
no votes are taken or no direction is given to staff. It could be, for example, that we have a workshop on different communication styles and different, how to work together better as a board.
Well, they include
A team building.
It includes discuss the status of projects and any items of general information. That means district business. That's not just saying we come and, have a team building activity. And for a board that ran on transparency, all of you, the fact you let that go in there is kind of disturbing.
I think you're again assuming intent, and I think we need to be careful about that. Because, never mind.
Does the council have any suggestions for us?
I think compliance with the Brown Act says it all. You're going to be noticing your meetings and publishing an agenda. The public will be free to attend, and if any actions are taken, they will be recorded in minutes. That is the purpose of the requirements of the Brown Act.
I'm fine with it as it's written. I believe the Brown Act is sufficiently strong enough that, and even what we say here about actions, direction, or votes require minutes. So I'm comfortable with it.
I can also add that this is a common practice in local government agencies. The triggering mechanism is really, when general information, you can have information about climate change or anything you want to have, better report writing. But if there is direction given, then minutes are required. And that's the triggering mechanism, or actions, like board cannot take any actions.
But the board can still exchange information. That's the thing. And that's the part that is concerning, because they can say all sorts of things.
No, that's a common practice in local government. They can exchange information, but they cannot give direction or act. They can't take any action.
I mean, there's a lot of things that are common practice that we can do, but are not good to do, and are things we try not to do, because this also creates a potential for abuse. It's not about what anyone's intent is, it's about you have something that's robust and protected against abuse.
This is draft language that came from the California Special District Association. We did not craft it from scratch.
And we've discussed this, when you're preparing policy and procedure, you don't contort yourself to prevent all bad behavior, because irresponsible and folks who disregard the law are going to do so in creative and unexpected ways. And so we don't contort ourselves, because we found when we were building a policy saying, we've seen this abuse in the past, we want to stop it, and that all of a sudden we had realized that there was a butterfly effect throughout the P&P manual, that we were creating problems and making illegitimate, innocuous action. So, I mean, I'm happy to put that workshops will be held between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. I'm totally fine with that. There will be no 3 a.m. workshops, which, as we all said, we wouldn't attend anyway. But within working hours or with the Brown Act.
That is also part of the Brown Act. The Brown Act insists that these things be done in a way that's consistent with public participation. So I feel like, to go to your point, we shouldn't contort ourselves. We're really, I would just suggest we move on. I did find the other thing I have a question about, which is on page 9, 4120.4.2. It says members of the public should address the board, and it does not allow for addressing staff, and I'm comfortable with that if that is intentional, but I just want to understand whether that is intentional or not.
It was very intentional. What do you mean?
It was extremely intentional. Typically speaking, members of the public will come to the podium and may have all kinds of questions and comments. It is for the board to decide if they want to ask staff to respond to those questions. The board is elected to be the decision maker, and they may or may not find that the question is relevant to their decision-making process. So, direct it to the board decides.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to suggest that with the noted changes that we ask staff to prepare this for
a second reading.
Right, and if possible, at the May 23rd meeting.
Policy.
You can't do a second reading without, like, you have to do a first reading, then a second reading. If you change it, it goes back to being a first reading.
I think you missed the explanation of our general counsel.
Well, that's what we did for the last time we went through it. That's what the fire board is doing right now. Why is it suddenly we're going against the current policy procedure manual? Just expedite this.
The changes we have made, I think, are so slight that and we're happy to print out as quickly as possible a second reading and prepare it for the website. But
These are relatively minor changes. There's not a lot of guidance for first and second readings outside of the ordinance context. I will tell you that in the ordinance context, these changes would not be sufficient to trigger the need for another first reading. If small changes like this forever required another first reading, then you would never get to the second reading. The whole point of the consideration meeting, to what this actually is in the current policy and procedures manual, is to allow the board to review the document and make whatever changes they need. If there are significant changes, well then yes, you might want to have another first reading, but that hasn't been requested tonight.
All right, we
yes.
don't need to entertain a motion.
No, policies 4,000 and 3,000.
Direction for a resolution.
Okay, I will ask general counsel to prepare a resolution adopting sections 3,000 and 4,000 and rescinding the appropriate sections in the current policy and procedure manual, assuming they were adopted.
Wait, what? We're passing 3,000? You said 4,000 and...
Prepare a resolution so that at our next meeting, we could take that under consideration as to whether to adopt it or not.
It would be to repeal 4,000 and 5,000, adopt the new 3,000 and 4,000, and renumber the current 3,000 as 6,000.
Just 3,000, as in the one we went through at the beginning.
No, the one that would be renumbered, I'm sorry, I know this is confusing, but the current manual's 3,000.
Okay, this
Would
one.
be renumbered.
I will second the motion.
Do we need a motion?
No, I agree.
We just need, we don't
Okay.
need board.
Consensus? Yes, I consent.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, thank you, it's good.
So with that, are we ready to move to adjourn? I am. Lila was sometime ago.
I will move that we adjourn to tonight's meeting.
I will second that motion.
Director Madabi, thank you. Director Debbie?
Yes.
Director Cheryl Swat?
Yes.
And Vice President Desai?
Aye.